Hi everyone, and welcome to today's session on education mental health training, practitioner roles and training. My name's Kathy. I'm one of the careers advisors based here in the careers service, and today we've got Shelley Haslam, who is from the university here at Edge Hill, and who is the course leader for the Education Mental Health Practitioner Roles Training. So if I can just introduce Shelley, I'm just going to stop sharing this slide so that you can see our faces.
Hi.
Hi Shelley, thanks very much for coming along to talk to us today. We've had a huge interest in your talk, so lots of students I can see still joining actually. So we're on about 51 at the moment, but I think we had about 70 booked. So maybe if we give people just a minute or two to get themselves to get booked on, does that sound okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, brilliant. I know that I was really keen to ask you to come and talk to us because we've had a lot of interest in these roles, and it feels as though this is a field that we're going to start seeing a lot more job roles.
That's the plan, yeah. The kind of national plan for children and young people's mental health is an emerging area, and I think the EMHP role is one of multiple new roles that have recently been developed. That the plan is to continue to embed kind of the idea of using education and joining that with mental health. So it is creating a number of opportunities from all sectors really, which is great.
Yeah, certainly that's the impression we've got, and there's a lot of interest, isn't there, across well, certainly across our university, but from a lot of sectors, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we're on sort of 2 minutes past now. Do you want to get sorted and share your slides, Shelley, and then we can get started?
Yeah, no problem.
That's brilliant. Oh, can I just say, Shelley, there's a few of us here who will keep an eye on the questions in chat if they come up. Do you want to take questions at the end or as you go through?
I'm open to either really. If you feel it's a pertinent one, I'm happy to take them in the middle or during, and then happy to do a Q&A at the end as well. I've tried to make the slides so that we'll cover everything I think you'd need to know. So that's context, which will help with any applications, but also then around the role of the EMHP, and also then finishing off a bit around kind of what the EMHP role requires in terms of quals and personal skills. And then finished off with a little bit of tips, really, I guess, from what we know of the students who've already been successful in getting the places. So that's kind of what I'm planning to cover. So that might, if one of your questions, I suppose, fits within that, you might want to save it to the end. But happy either way.
Yeah, I mean that sounds perfect actually. So what we'll do then is, if people put their questions into chat, we'll probably leave them until the end. If we can answer them straight away, if it's a kind of careersy one, then we'll answer as we go along. If we think it's something that's really essential to let you know, we'll turn our audio on and we'll ask you. But other than that, we'll leave them to the end then.
Smashing.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks, and Shelley.
Thank you. So hi, yeah, I mean it's great from our perspective to see so many people interested in the education mental health practitioner role. You know, as a university that was successful in winning a tender for this training, to be able to be a site who delivers the education mental health practitioner training, it's been it's been a great esteem for us, and it's fantastic to see so many people within the institution who are keen potentially to move into this training and to take one of these roles. So I guess we're at an advantage really, because we are an institution who has the tender to deliver the training, so we can give you that insider knowledge, if you like, about what the programme's about and how it works, and also in terms of application as well. So that's my plan really, to talk you through that and kind of give you a little bit more information. Any hints and tips I can do, I'm happy to offer. But I thought what I'd just start with is a little bit around the context of the actual education mental health practitioner role. So I don't want to get into a full lecture for you, because hopefully some of you have, you've looked into this yourselves before. But I will give you some context that I think would help if you were to apply for the role. It would particularly help in understanding kind of where this role fits, and in terms of, you showing knowledge from an application perspective. So in terms of the education mental health practitioner. This is a role that was developed as part of the government green paper, which was around transforming children and young people's mental health. So the paper essentially said that the services we have at the moment are insufficient and also quite reactive as opposed to being proactive in supporting children's mental health. So from the green paper, there was an agenda really to improve services for children and young people. And one of the ways of doing that was around developing early links between education and children's mental health services. So the education mental health practitioner role, which is the title of the job that you'd particularly be interested in, was developed as part of this agenda to improve access to services. And the plan was to, and still is, to increase the number of practitioners who are directly working with children and young people who can offer low intensity evidence-based interventions. And so what we mean by that is that the role of the EMHP is essentially to work with children and young people, offering interventions. So that might be interventions that are informed by practices such as CBT. So it might be behavioural interventions, anxiety interventions, sleep practices. So it's quite varied really, but they're all low-level interventions that you'd be delivering. And the plan would be that would be done in the education setting, or at least liaising with the education setting. So the plan being that if we can get involved in children and young people's mental health in an early stage and also in an environment that they're comfortable with, then the intention there is that we can help to improve the outcomes for these children and young people. And what the EMHP role is primarily around as well is preventing those early symptoms, those early signs from being missed, which can then obviously develop into a more problematic mental health problem. And it's also to offer what we consider to be early intervention, because the theory tells us that the earlier we can intervene in children and young people's mental health and well-being in a positive way, the more capacity we've got then to prevent children following a trajectory that may then see them needing more intense services such as CAMHS, or also then developing into what's potentially a lifelong condition. So the green paper and also the kind of concepts behind the education mental health practitioner role are very much about early intervention, improving outcomes, and offering mental health support, but also health promotion. And the plan being that actually children spend large portions of their time within the education setting, if we don't include COVID. So actually that's a prime opportunity for us to get involved and to try and see children where we might actually start to see some of those problems coming through. So just to really put it into context, it stems from a political agenda really, and a push from a national perspective for us to improve access to therapies for children and young people. And if this is a new role to you, so I've seen some people coming in, and I know some students who are on our current courses. We run programs around child and adolescent mental health. We run programs around general health and well-being, and I know some of you from the sort of education and psychology sector. So you may all be coming in with different backgrounds and knowledge. So I've just put a couple of examples of key reading that, this isn't homework from the session, don't get me wrong, but it's guidance really to what underpins this role, and that actually you may be asked to show some awareness of in terms of interviews and applications for the education mental health practitioner role. So the three papers that I've put here just as a reference for you, the Department of Health and Department for Education green paper that I referred to earlier, so that's the first picture you've got there, and that was from 2017, and essentially in there it sets out the plan for how we're going to improve children and young people's mental health, and what's been decided by practitioners, education, health, social care, all manner of sort of sectors came together and said, actually, this is where we see the gaps. The second paper is around Futures in Mind, which is from the NHS England and Department of Health, and that was in 2015. So it precedes the green paper, but again, if you look in that, you look through, Future in Mind actually sets out a huge responsibility on education settings to be involved in supporting children and young people's mental health. And so the green paper then kind of took those ideas and puts them into practice. And then the third paper that's up here, the Implementing the 5-Year Forward View for Mental Health, is very much where the practical application of what an education mental health practitioner role is, and where that sits within the bigger picture of mental health services that I'll show you in a minute. So those 3 papers I think are quite useful. I'm not saying you have to read them all, but I think it's good to have an understanding that underpinning this role is a political context, and also an initiative really that's about, again, improving access to therapies and to early interventions for children and young people. And you'll see the kind of little statistic I've taken from the bottom there stems from these reports, whereby the agenda is that we're significantly wanting to increase services. So an additional 345,000 children and young people should be able to access support via an MHST as a mental health in schools team by 2023-24. So the government have set an agenda to say, actually, we know that not enough young people are being seen in an environment that they need to access support, and actually we want to significantly increase that. And that's fantastic to see from our perspective, but also from that education mental health practitioner perspective, because it gives you some reassurance there as well that being part of this project, your focus is helping young people, and that you're part of this bigger agenda in terms of improving and then continuing to improve the services available to children and young people. So those 3 papers are just really useful. Again, like I say, it's not a lecture, so I'm not encouraging you to necessarily go and access them, but they are very, very useful in terms of giving you an idea of where the EMHP, the education mental health practitioner role, stems from. So I thought what I'd just do as well is just talk you through the actual role of the EMHP, because I think that's, that definitely will be something that you'd be expected to show an awareness of, and it may be useful for you if you're a bit undecided about where you see yourself, or if this is a role for you. So I'll give you a little bit of context about what the actual role involves. So to be an education mental health practitioner, you're essentially employed by the NHS, who offer you a training contract essentially. And as part of that training contract, you're required to complete a PGDIP, so a postgraduate diploma, education mental health practitioner. So we're delivering the education mental health practitioner training to NHS employees who are trainee EMPs, as we call them, or EMHPs. So you work within the NHS for a number of days a week, and then for the other days of the week you're in university with us. So the way that Edge Hill do this is you're in practice 3 days a week, and you're on campus for university studies 2 days a week. And while you're with us, you're studying for your postgraduate diploma, education mental health practitioner. And at the moment this award is not accredited, but I've put a little star next to the word accreditation, because actually there's a huge push for this to be accredited, and there's work going on at a national level to get accreditation, most likely from the BPS, the British Psychological Society, but there are other awarding bodies that may be involved, because actually this status follows alongside the other therapeutic roles. So the CBT practitioners, for example, cognitive behavioural therapy practitioners who need accredited qualifications. So that's something that's being done nationally to look at accrediting the programme. And if you were to start the programme this year and then they accredited it next year, they would back accredit anyone who's completed. So you would still get that accredited status. So you'd be studying 2 days a week towards the education mental health practitioner role. And in terms of the other element of your role, that's to be in practice, and it's encouraged and it's required that when you're in practice you would be working with children and young people almost from the first day. Now that's not to say you'd be thrown in, because actually you're provided with a support team, so you come as part of what's called a mental health in schools team, and that's a team made up of practitioners, NHS practitioners, so bands 5, 6 and 7. That might not mean much to people, but essentially they are qualified practitioners themselves who'll support you as an education mental health practitioner in training to be working with children and young people in practice. So you might be, if I thought of a typical day for an education mental health practitioner trainee and post-qualified, because essentially it's the same role, it might be that you go to your link school, for example, and you might have appointments with several children who've been identified as needing some low-level interventions from yourself. So you might do some one-to-one work with some young people. So you'd be expected to use listening skills, you'd be expected to show empathy and to offer interventions that we train you how to deliver. So you might be offering an anxiety intervention, for example. Again, we part of the reason that you're in training is that we can give you that expertise and those skills. And then alongside that, what else you might do on a daily basis is work with teachers or parents, for example, to deliver some psychoeducation. You might liaise with other agencies, so that might be places like CAMHS or other voluntary sector services, to see what other support you might be able to put in place for children and young people. And other parts of the role involve assessments, so meeting new children, seeing if they're suitable for the services that you can offer. Doing a little bit around risk, so is this a young person that's suitable for your low intensity support? And signposting as well, so where you might get a young person who perhaps a school had referred, it might be that actually that young person's more suited to a more intense intervention, or they might be more suited to being referred into, say, a third sector organisation. So it's a very practical role, and it has a number of facets, really. Therapeutic interventions is one of those roles, but there's also a strong emphasis on supporting schools through psychoeducation, through group work, peer mentoring, and a number of other practices, really. And that's what actually ties this role together as what's called a whole school approach. So the whole school approach is something that when you read those documents I mentioned before, you'll see is the real push that education mental health practitioners are almost part of that education system, but they're also sitting within mental health services. So the mental health support team sits within the NHS. So you'd work between the MHST and the schools. So what you're looking to deliver is what we call CYPI Apt, which is Children and Young People's Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. And it's an initiative that's been going for a number of years, where, again, it's about early access and early intervention, and you'd be part of that workforce delivering those interventions. So the context to it is essentially you being a practitioner in an education setting, but also, also liaising back and being supported by mental health services in the background. So I think it's a fascinating role in that you're able to offer those interventions, but the other side to that is that you can also work with the whole school to make sure that the support available is connected, and that there's this collaboration around supporting children and young people. So in terms of what you'd study as an education mental health practitioner, there's a whole year of study, and I've listed the modules on my next slide, but I thought it would just be useful for you to see what the programme aims are. So essentially what we're doing with you for those 12 months that you're studying as an EMHP, that runs alongside you being in practice working as an EMHP. And our kind of remit really is for you to develop an understanding around children and young people's mental health, how that manifests, or how that looks, and how we might see that as practitioners. It's also to support you to develop practical skills in supporting young people through processes such as peer support, psychoeducation, one-to-one low intensity interventions, but also group interventions if that's appropriate. And I think what's obviously, knowing some of you come from different backgrounds, so health, psychology, social care, and so on, I think you'll probably all look at that and think, well, I can certainly do parts of this and I can do other parts, but there may be gaps in your knowledge. And I guess the EMHP programme has been written to accommodate all of that. So if you've already spent 3 years studying about child mental health, for example, the benefit there is that when you come to write your academic work and complete your assignments, you've potentially got an advantage just there in terms of your assessments. Whereas perhaps those of you who've come from a counselling background may benefit from having had those skills that you've developed around empathy and kind of practical clinical skills. But there's also scope for people who maybe come from completely different backgrounds as well. So we get trainees who'll come, you know, they might have spent, I don't know, 10 years working in business, and actually they've volunteered recently with children and young people, and they've developed skills that they've then been able to put into practice, and actually they may be entirely suitable for this course. So you'll find that on the course it won't always just be graduates from university, it will be people who've had a whole range of experiences that have involved working with children and young people. So the programme aims are quite broad, with the idea being that we can educate you in terms of the skills you need, the knowledge and the skills, and the practical application of those. And so in terms of supporting the development of skills, we do that through a number of ways. So there's obviously you're on campus, or would be in theory, COVID aside, 2 days of the week where you're getting that academic experience really, but you're also getting experience from a skills perspective. So we do a lot of skills-based work with people. So there is, you know, I will throw it out there are requirements for you to role play. You've got to be confident enough to be able to record yourself doing interventions. Your assessments for the programme are around practically putting interventions in place with children and young people, and then submitting that as part of your assessments. So it is a very practical course, and I think that's something I'd just highlight again and again, that particularly if you're wanting to get ahead in terms of interviews and such, part of the assessment is that you're able to actually demonstrate those listening skills, those kind of early empathy skills. Not to say you'd be an expert, because we train you in that, but certainly just to have an understanding that children and young people will need that empathetic listening ear. So those are the aims of the programme, and I have just listed here for you the modules that Edgehill offer. Now, I can see a couple of questions kind of sliding in about whether or not other institutions offer this. They do. The education mental health practitioner role is delivered by a number of NHS trusts who are attached to a number of universities. Now, in the Northwest, there's actually Edgehill University, and then GMMH, which is Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust. They have a psychological therapist training centre, and they are the other Northwest provider of education mental health practitioner training at this time. So in the Northwest, there's Edgehill and GMMH. In the wider North, we do have other universities. Trying to think where they are. Northumbria, Sheffield. There's another one back at Derby. So they're kind of quite broadly spread, if I'm honest. And at this point, that's because we are still quite early in terms of the development of the education mental health practitioner programme and its rollout. In terms of trusts, so obviously you'd be employed by a trust. We all, as a university, we're attached to a number of trusts. So we've worked with places like Blackburn with Darwin, North West Boroughs, Alder Hey, Cheshire and Wirral. So actually there's quite a broad spectrum of trusts that are involved. And I think something that inevitably will come up in my later slides just around how do you apply, and that's you're actually applying through the NHS for these jobs. You don't apply directly to us, you apply to the NHS, and we're part of that recruitment process, but I'll cover that later on in more detail. But to bring it back to the content, the reason I kind of diverted off there is because actually what we deliver is a national curriculum developed by HEE, Health Education England. So what you can see in front of you there is the modules that we've written that you would study, and these would be the same types of modules wherever you went. So if you went to an institution in the south, they would deliver the same type of modules, because actually we've got a national curriculum to make sure that all of our EMHPs are able to do the same things. That doesn't mean we're not creative though, because actually we get the opportunity to add bits in. So some institutions will offer more around, say, sleep, whereas other institutions will take a focus on anxiety. Some will do a lot around peer mentoring. We're doing a lot around parenting programs. So it's interesting to look at the different institutions that offer, and in terms of what their curriculum, how they've chose to set that up. But this is Edgehill's curriculum you'll see in front of you here. So it's 6 modules, 20 credits per module. And just to highlight that to be a qualified EMHP, you have to complete all modules to a pass. That's a requirement of the course. So to be an accredited EMHP requires completion of the full programme. I won't go into detail about the modules, because actually if you go onto the Edgehill website, you can find all of our modules and details about what each of those involves. But just to bring your attention really to the way the curriculum's set up, and again, this relates to if you're making an application, you can show where your skills really lie. You'll see that we talk about kind of context and values of children's mental health, and there's quite a lot in there around assessment and engagement of children and young people. There's a focus on the education setting, and there's also a focus on interventions and evidence-based approaches. So to me, if I was a graduate from an education perspective, I'd certainly be picking up on the elements where education's met, or discussed, and I'd be showing how you can relate your skills and your knowledge to particularly those education strands. The same if you're coming from a psychology background, you've probably studied quite a lot around the use of interventions, psychological approaches, evidence-based interventions. So you could really kind of hone your skills in there. Those of you coming from a health background, I mean, actually you've probably studied quite a lot of those. So again, you could think quite a bit around assessment, the processes of assessment, what's needed for demonstrating good listening skills and so on. So the same with counselling. So I think it's important when you're making your applications to demonstrate where your skills lie in terms of that EMHP curriculum. But again, you don't have to know all this to get the post, because you would be trained in all this. But it would be really important to demonstrate the understanding of those skills and knowledge. Because this is a joint role between you being an employee of an NHS trust and also a student within a university, so a kind of a training employment role essentially, you would be undertaking teaching and learning not just from a kind of university perspective, but actually when you're in practice, all the time that you're in practice, you're learning and developing your skills as well. So as a university, we take the responsibility for giving you the academic background and clinical skills, and the NHS Trust sign up to supporting you from a clinical practice point of view as well. So in terms of the teaching and the way that the programme's delivered, very similar to what I think most of you will have already experienced if you've done a degree at Edgehill University. We have the same processes, lectures, workshops, seminars. We're very much about supporting you to work as groups, because typically recruitment happens in small clusters. And what I mean by that is, say Cheshire and Wirral Trust recruit 8 EMHPs. Those 8 EMHPs will normally all come to one institution. So we encourage you to work collectively together to think about your own service and kind of develop your learning from your service perspective as well. So we do quite a lot of group work learning, and there's a strong emphasis within the EMHP programme for work-based learning as well. So making sure that you're bringing the experiences you're having into practice, bringing them into your training and exploring those in more detail, reflecting. There's a lot of reflection as part of the EMHP role, thinking about how you reflect on working with young people, working with other practitioners, working within the school, because actually you've got multiple identities really as an EMHP. So lots of encouraged reflection as part of the programme as well. There's a strong emphasis about collaboration, so we will invite supervisors in terms of, you will work with those in practice, but we'll invite them in as well, so they'll come in and offer guest lectures, or they might come and contribute to sessions. So there is a real emphasis on making sure that we're not just teaching you for those 2 days and then you're going away and not using that knowledge. It is really important to us that you can take that knowledge, put that into practice, and then vice versa. What you're learning in practice, you'll bring back to us. So they're very, very interconnected, and it'd be almost impossible really to separate them out. So it will feel sometimes as an EMHP that you're, well, it should feel really that it's a connected process. What we're teaching you in university, you should be able to then go and use as skills in the role that you're employed in as well. And that's why I've just put a slide up around clinical practice as well. So that's what we call the days that you're in practice. They're your clinical days, then you've got your academic days with us. In terms of the days that you spent in your service, essentially that's you engaging with children, young people, parents, teachers, part of the CAMHS team working within the sort of bigger sector of children's mental health. And the idea is that you're supporting those children and people to develop their skills, their knowledge, to educate them on how to support their mental health, but also to support the wider support networks for those children and young people. And again, that ties back into what I'll say again, which is the whole school approach. So a lot of the words I'm giving you are kind of things that I think would be useful for you to think about if you were considering an application, just to kind of show that you really understand the depth of the role as well. So from a clinical practice point of view, you're an employee of an NHS trust. So, in terms of that, you're supervised as part of the NHS role. You're offered your line management supervision, but you also get clinical supervision and you also get case management supervision. And for anyone who's not sure what they are, well, you can look those up, but essentially what this means is that because you're a trainee whilst still studying, but whilst still working with children and young people, you're supported to do that. So the supervision's your way of reflecting on making sure that what you're doing in practice is right, that you're making good decisions, that you're working safely, because obviously you're potentially working with vulnerable children and young people, and it's important for us from a safeguarding perspective to make that you've got full support in doing that. So I think it's probably pertinent at this point to say that I think skills in working with people are vital in this role. And again, I think from the majority of the backgrounds that people will come with, that won't be problematic. But the EMHP it's about being able to support people at times when they're really struggling, and so it takes a lot from you as well as an individual. But that's why we offer so much supervision. So again, as part of the training, you're offered support from us, but also when you're in practice, you're offered lots of support from your colleagues in practice as well. So in terms of the types of supervision, there is case management supervision. So that's where you would discuss the number of cases that you've got, where they are, your progress with those cases. You'd share ideas with your supervisors about where you might want to take that case, what changes you might want to make. You also get what's called clinical supervision. So that's where you, at a personal level, can discuss the clinical cases that you're working with and the impacts that might be having on yourself as well. And then there's obviously your line management supervision as well, because you're an employee of a trust. So it'd be important for you to have your standard line management supervision as well. So you can imagine, hopefully you can kind of start to see, I visualise everything, but see the fact that this is supportive. Yes, you're a trainee, yes, you're studying 2 days in university, but yes, you're also actually working as a practitioner in practice as well. So but around you is that support network from the mental health in schools teams, the education settings that you sat within, because you'd be nominated perhaps to certain schools that you'd go to, so you'd build up good relationships with those schools, but also from the wider clinical teams that are available to you as well. So I think in terms of the education mental health practitioner role, that's a lot of information for you to take. I appreciate that, and I'm thankful to Kathy and Debbie for recording this as well, because it is a lot of information that I'm sharing with you really. But I just wanted to make sure that you've got a real understanding about what the role is and how your own personal skills and skills and qualities, I suppose, and your own values would fit into that role as well. This isn't a role that you can drop in and out of. Being at university for those 2 days a week is essential for you to build your skills to be a good, effective education mental health practitioner. And it is, I won't lie, it's an intensive year's training. If anyone's ever looked at doing CBT training, for example, which is the next level beyond this, then you'll know that those courses can take up to 3 years for people to develop skills. We're giving you this EMHP low intensity practitioner training in a year, which is essentially a year of 2 days a week in university, 3 days a week in practice. And I can just see some questions I can answer as I'm talking because they make sense to answer. And in terms of the age ranges that you'd be working with, EMHPs and mental health in schools teams, depending on the area, can work with primary schools right the way through to colleges. So a good example of this would be Leeds have got an education mental health practitioner training programme, and they work primarily with colleges, whereas one of our trusts, Blackburn with Darwin, they work with primary school and secondary school. So it's nice because there's, depending on where you study will depend on the different age ranges of children. You wouldn't necessarily get a choice in that because actually it depends on which the trusts and where they're offering their support. Okay, so some of the things I think people are asking that probably ties into some of this is the entry requirements. Now I've taken these, hence why they're a bit messy, but these are directly taken from one of the job descriptions that is offered as for an education mental health practitioner, because just like our curriculum is wherever you go you should get a very, very similar curriculum, in theory the job descriptions should be pretty much the same wherever you go as well, because these are HEE specific criteria for people applying to the programme. So there's a couple of key areas I've highlighted here which I've cut and pasted from one of the documents, and one of them is around qualifications. So HEE require that you can evidence your ability to study at degree level. So I know some people had asked, if I've already got a master's, will I be advantaged, or if you've already got a first class honours and so on. Actually, if you look at the criteria, it's saying clear evidence of the ability to study at degree levels. That'll be assessed on an individual basis, but obviously having that ability to study at level 6, level 7 is obviously helpful in terms of that. For the postgraduate diploma education mental health practitioner, you're studying at level 7, so it's credits towards a master's, which I think someone else asked before. So it's 120 credits, and masters is 180. You can top up an education mental health practitioner qualification at a later point if you needed to a master's. In terms of good solid basic literacy and numeracy qualifications minimum level 2, that essentially means what the equivalent is of a GCSE at a pass. So for English, Edge will ask at English we ask for a C, and at maths we ask for a pass. That's our own specific interpretation of that. Other universities might have different requirements. In terms of competencies, obviously being able to be computer literate. I mean, most of you have got onto here, so that strikes me as you being computer literate if I'm honest. But also this idea of you being self-motivated as a learner, I do think that's something that they will expect you to be able to demonstrate. And one of the questions, EdHill encourages people to look at is, are you a motivated learner? And you will be required to be able to plan your time and to negotiate that, being in practice and being a student at the same time. In terms of your knowledge, what's assessed actually quite a lot at interview is around your knowledge of the education system, and also tying into that how mental health can be influenced by being within that education system. So again, for those of you from an education background, fab, you've got, you can tie into that, but also from a psychology background, you can think about how the influences of society and education practices can infer in terms of children's mental health. Same for health, you can think about child development and child mental health and how that's influenced by education. So again, it is an opportunity for anyone, I would say, really. One thing that I know some people asked about was how many hours experience might you need to have. Now, there isn't an hours requirement that's specifically identified, but what it does say, which you'll see in the sort of third top, I don't know, your right hand side, I think it says previous experience. It does say it's desirable that applicants will have previous experience of working with children and young people, especially in an education and/or mental health setting. Something I get asked a lot is, how do I get that experience if you've not already got that? I would encourage you to link up with youth organisations, charities, so Barnardo's, Young Minds. We've got across the Northwest, there are hundreds of charities work with children and young people who are disadvantaged, who need support. for their mental health. You could volunteer in schools. Obviously, some of this is impacted by COVID, and obviously that is taken into account for applications. But it could be placement hours that you've done. I guess it's really about how you support your application by demonstrating your skills. So being able to say, you know, I did a placement in a youth organisation or with an eating disorders service, and these are the skills that I learned. So it is important to get some type of experience. And again, that's because from the very get-go, you are working with children and young people. So we haven't got necessarily time to orientate someone who's never had that experience before, and neither does clinical practice. So that's the importance really of having some experience. And then there's just a couple of kind of other points there, being able to have a DBS, and also being able to manage sensitive, traumatic and potentially emotionally distressing caseloads. I've put that on there for a reason. And again, the education mental health practitioner role is, I wouldn't sugarcoat it for anyone. It's a difficult role because you're dealing with children and people who might be, they might be really struggling with their mental health and well-being, and you are that person who may be asked to support them with that. They could be engaging in self-harming behaviour. It might be that they are experiencing thoughts of hurting themselves or others. And obviously all this is managed within your role. You're not left to do it on your own, but obviously there's always a potential emotional toll there. So I'd just encourage you to reflect on, you know, your resilience as an individual and how ready you feel for this type of role. But obviously you're the best person to kind of think about that and your suitability. So the entry requirements are quite specific. They are set out at a national level. And then some other questions that I think I might be able to answer which apply to this slide is around the pay, the progression and the applications. I said this to Kathy when we were emailing about this session. Absolutely the case that these roles, and I think the number of people we've got here today is a good example of the popularity of these roles. So people were asking about how you'd apply and where do you find these roles, and you've looked and there's none available. And that's because they come in waves, if you like, in recruitment cycles. So because you've got to do the training as an education mental health practitioner first, for obvious reasons, those trainee roles only start at certain times. So Edge Hill have just started their next cohort of education mental health practitioners in March. We would anticipate starting the next cohort potentially around January next year. So the intakes are usually, but not always, so don't kind of quote me on this, but they're usually around the September and then the January time. So adverts would usually then be made available for those posts about potentially 8 weeks before. So you'd be looking in the 2 months before September and the 2 months before January to see where those roles are available. So my advice would be to set up an NHS jobs alert and to search specifically for trainee education mental health practitioner, so that when those adverts are put out, you'll be pinged to let you know that they've come available. Not all training is done within NHS trusts, which I should point out. So for example, some third sector partners actually get contracts to deliver EMHP support. We still train their practitioners. So places like Barnardo's, YPAS, Venus in Liverpool, and then we're obviously nationally there'd be other charitable and third sector organisations who would recruit MHPs, but they will still typically advertise through the NHS. So they'll be a partner of the NHS. So it's worth setting up that job alert if you're interested. And I have the quote I put in the middle there: due to the volume of interest in previous advertisements, we can anticipate the advertisement closing sooner than 1 week. I've put that on there, taken directly from the last advert that Cheshire and Wirral put out, for the reason that these jobs, they fill up very, very quickly, the applications. So the NHS will set a cut-off point. If I told you that the last recruitment cycle for one of these posts closed within 3 days, that's how quickly these will come and go. So if you are interested, the minute you find that available, you need to start your application and have your information in place. I missed that question, but I'm sure Kathy will let me know about that later. And so that's why I've said there is fierce competition for these positions. So it is worth being mindful of that. We've had some delays with recruitment because of COVID, so that might be why we're starting later on. So I might be confusing people, but you have to apply for the job first. So you have to get a position with the NHS, and then that puts you onto the course. So we don't take direct applicants for the EMHP programme as a university. You'd come to us because you've got the job within the NHS, but we are part of that application process as well, as in we shortlist with the NHS and we interview alongside the NHS trusts, because you've got to be suitable for the post and the educational aspects as well. I keep talking about you being a trust employee. That is the case. So you are on while you're training, you're on what's considered a Band 4 NHS contract. And then typically your contract's usually between 1 and 2 years to begin with. Once you've qualified, you then move up to a Band 5, which is sort of 25 to, I think it's, well, I'm guessing now, I think it's 29, I'm trying to remember when I was in the NHS. But you essentially would start off at a Band 4 whilst you're unqualified, and once you're qualified, you move up to a Band 5. If you start looking now, you'll start to see there are EMHP roles available nationally, so it's just a case of looking where they're available, but obviously you need to be trained to apply for those. What I'm encouraging you to look at is in terms of progression. Once you've finished training, you might decide to move somewhere else, and there are EMHP qualified roles that you would then be able to move into. In terms of, I'm trying to think of anything else you need to know about that. So in terms of applications, my advice genuinely is just to be quick, if that's what you're interested in, and also just to bear in mind that you are essentially being employed to be a student and an employee of a trust. So you'd be applying to the job of the trust that you're interested in. I'm not sure there's much more I need to tell you on that one, because I think some of the questions people might have might draw out some more of that information. So that leads me to ask if there's anyone who's got any questions, really. I know there's been lots flying in, and I've only managed to answer a couple of those.
Hi Shelley, I've just been keeping an eye on some of the questions that have been asked that I think you haven't automatically or that we couldn't answer, and perhaps some of you might have covered some of these, but if I go through them. There was a few questions about the level, amount and type of experience required when you apply, and there was someone who was anxious that they didn't have a lot of children and young people experience, for example. So could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think the thing to do there is, if you do feel like you maybe don't have that much experience, I'd encourage you to try and get some more if you can. I mean, they don't have a minimum cut-off, so it's not like you've got to have done a number of hours to have got to that status, if you like, to be employable in that role. What you need to be able to do is to reflect on the experiences you have had and demonstrate perhaps where you might have supported young people who've been experiencing mental health problems. And that doesn't have to be in a formal capacity, it doesn't have to be as a therapist, that could be more as a teaching assistant, or as a teacher, or as I'm trying to think of other examples now, as a youth worker or working for a charity. It's quite broad, really, the experience. So I think it's about how you use whatever experience you have got to demonstrate your skills and your suitability for the role. There isn't a cut-off, but obviously anything you've got where you've been working directly with children, young people, from a mental health or an education perspective, will put you at an advantage.
Okay, it would just be interesting to have a little bit of an insight into the kind of backgrounds of the students you've got perhaps in the current course.
Yeah, and that's actually something I did mean to mention on the last slide. We get a really varied background, and what I will say is these are really competitive roles. So we actually get some people who've maybe been a teacher for 20 years and they've decided that, you know what, I don't want to be the teacher anymore, I want to be the person who's helping these young people from the other kind of side, if you like. So we've had teachers who've been qualified, we've had, but then the other side of that is we've had maybe people who've worked in business, for example, but who've spent some time volunteering with children, young people who've been obviously experiencing mental health problems. We do get a lot of graduates. We've had graduates from education, psychology, health, So again, that's another kind of common avenue. So it does depend, but what I would say is you are obviously, it's very competitive in terms of we do get a lot of graduates with first class, second class honours, people who've worked in the sector for years and years. You're all assessed based on essentially how you fill in your application form and how you perform at interview. So I know careers, you offer quite a lot of support around interviews and applications as well. So I would encourage people to utilise that as well. So they are competitive roles. You'd probably not be, it wouldn't be unusual for us to get hundreds of applications for 8 positions. So it's a case of shorting down, really. I would want to be realistic about that.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So another question was, I think you've probably answered this actually, that was dates for adverts and intake. So I think you kind of said September and January and look for the adverts a couple of months beforehand.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question I noted was the type of supervision. Is it case management? Again, you did talk quite a lot about supervision, but that was a specific question.
Yeah, case management supervisions, when we look at essentially you as an EMHP and what cases you're holding, so it's quite a practical supervision really, whereas clinical supervisions where you talk about, you might bring to clinical supervision a case that's really bugging you, I suppose. Maybe you've got a specific question about a treatment plan, and then the other sort of supervision I mentioned was line management, and that would be more about you as a member of the NHS Trust and how you're performing, a little bit like performance management really. So you tend to get all 3 of those when you're part of the EMHP. Well, you do get all 3 of those as an EMHP.
Thank you. Okay, so there was quite a few questions around funding, and I think you cleared up a lot of these, but there were questions about, well, how do you fund the course and the fees? And I think you made that clear that actually the fees are covered by the NHS, I think, aren't they? As if you,
yeah.
And in terms of maintenance, you don't get a maintenance grant because you're getting employed.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. And the question just come up there, and that was about, once you have completed the training, are you still employed by the NHS?
Yeah, so typically they'll give you a 1-year or a 2-year contract. It's most commonly a 2-year contract. So the first year you are training, the second year you're employed as an EMHP. And then after that, we anticipate that there are roles available. That's what I was saying. If you have a look, there are different roles available. But the benefit of having an EMHP qualification and that low-level interventions training is that actually, if you did decide that the EMHP role wasn't for you, that is transferable into other roles. You'd have to look at, I guess, where you saw yourself going with that, but it would be particularly relevant to either further study around high-intensity therapies, or we also get people moving around into education or into health as well. So it's quite a portable qualification, even though it is specific to education mental health practitioners.
Okay, thank you. Well, that was really useful actually, because my next question was a couple of questions around that. So someone had said, I'm interested in CBT. Would this be a good starting point? And someone else there has just put up, I'm really interested in CAMHS. Would this be a good route for that?
Yeah, I think the thing to bear in mind is obviously the time that you're taking to get to that point, really. So you'd obviously need to be an EMHP and training for the year. Then you'd need to hone those skills really as a qualified EMHP, by which point then if you wanted to do CBT, you'd then need to go and train in CBT as well. So I guess the question would be, is it definitely that you want to start as an EMHP, or is it that you'd be better off looking more at the high intensity kind of CBT training programs instead? So there are adult versions of this, if you like. So you've got PWP, psychological wellbeing practitioners. That's another kind of recruit to train type post as well. So I guess it just depends really where you see yourself going with that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. A few questions about location, which I think you kind of answered that they're across the UK, and different trusts will advertise. Do different trusts and different locations still have the same time frame for applications and adverts? Do you know? Is it pretty much around the academic year?
Typically, yeah. So the way that the kind of funding stems really is typically the same. So we tend to all try and start around the same time. EMHPs are trained in waves, we call it. So we're on wave 4, and there's plans up to wave 10 at the moment for training, which is a benefit to people who are thinking about this. Because I know some people are like, well, I'm not finished my degree. will it be around when I am? So there's 2 waves a year. So the waves I mentioned, typically around September, around January, are relatively kind of static, but obviously the HEE could at any point say, right, we want to add in another wave, and that might open up another opportunity. But typically, I'd say September, January is not unusual for the way that they should start. Like I say, we've been delayed this year because of COVID.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And someone had specifically said, are these posts available in Northern Ireland?
I saw that post, and that is a good question. I don't actually think I can answer that. What I would recommend, I'm trying to think if we haven't personally worked with any universities, but we only really worked collectively in the north. I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid, is the honest answer.
Yep. Okay, thank you. I think probably, I know Claire had put a link to the Health Careers link earlier on, so that might give more information about sort of regional places where it's offered. So a couple of others. One was, where would you be based for clinical training? And then there was a couple that were asking about age. And again, I think you kind of covered it, but perhaps people have missed that. So if you wouldn't mind going over that again.
Sure, yeah. So in terms of your clinical practice, you'd be employed by a specific trust. So if I gave you the example of Blackburn with Darwen as a trust, they then have different sites within that trust. So wherever the mental health in schools team is based, that's where you'd be based. You'd then work with schools in that locality who've agreed to be part of this mental health in schools team. So schools that are invited to participate, they're not forced. So you'd only really work with schools where they see the value of having an EMHP involved. And then the other question was, I've forgotten it now. So it was, where would you be based, and
the age range.
The age range, yeah. So it can be primary school, secondary school, or colleges. Like I say, some areas are specific. So like Leeds, for example, have done a lot of their EMHP work in colleges, whereas, for example, Blackburn with Darwen cover primary, secondary. Some of our other services cover all of them as well. So it just depends. I couldn't tell you where everyone does, because it's locality based, really. Where's the need? That's what we're trying to cover. You know, where do people need to be supported?
Yeah, I know when you were mentioned earlier, sort of the likes of YPAS and what have you. So is it the case that sometimes people won't be based in a school, but will be based in an organisation that deals with young people?
Yeah, so you'd still work with the schools, because the education mental health practitioner requires that element. But what you'd do, so rather than being sat within an NHS trust, you might, so YPAS might be funded to hold an MHSP, and then you'd work with schools and YPAS. You'd still be connected to the NHS ultimately, but it's kind of a, I can't think what the word is, but almost like a shell corporation, if you like. It's they can host the mental health in schools teams, just like NHS Trust would, and then you would then link into schools from there.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And again, Mia said, well, in that case, could you, in regards to working with the child with CAMHS, could we get a role in CAMHS with this qualification?
Potentially. I mean, I'm trying to think. So obviously, Edgehill have had their first cohort through. It depends, I suppose, if the CAMHS service, are looking for someone with those low intensity skills. And I guess every trust would look differently. So if I think about a recent job that was advertised, mental health practitioner job with, it's in Leyland actually, and it was only a couple of weeks ago, and it was interesting because prior to very recently, you had to be a nurse or a social worker or an occupational therapist to apply for those jobs, so what we call a core profession. Actually, a number of trusts have started to remove the core profession requirement, so you could be a mental health practitioner and apply using other qualifications. This would be an example of what would be relevant, so it is possible. I'm not saying there's a direct route there, but definitely we're seeing that because of the need for mental health practitioners in children and young people services, they have started to move away from that real focus on just core professions now, which is really good.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, so we've had a couple of questions about numbers.
Yeah. So it is, again, part of the competition of this is that the numbers are very limited. So Edgehill University, for example, last year we had 23 EMHPs, which means that we had about 6 from all 4 of our different trusts. this year we've got nearly 40 EMHPs. So each year the HEE are funding more places, but it comes down to, again, locality and need. So across the Northwest, we have got a few MHSTs, but there's still scope for expansion, which might mean bringing in new trusts. Eventually as well, it might mean bringing in new universities, who knows, because the plan is for this project to keep expanding. So it is competitive because there are a small number of places essentially on that each trust has to fund, and then we therefore educate.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So a couple of other questions that are coming up, they keep on coming in. So someone's asked if you link with Place to Be.
And I don't think that, we've not worked with them as a partner organisation, and I can't think of any of our other universities that have. It's not to say they wouldn't in the future, but at this point they're not one of the partners involved that I'm aware of.
Yeah, thank you. There was a question about, do you need GCSE maths, which I think you covered.
Yeah, I was just saying that from our perspective, as Edge Hill University, we ask for English at a C and then maths at a pass. Other institutions might have other requirements around that, but that's what Edge Hill have set as an entry requirement, which we ask the trusts to put on as their advertisement.
Great, thank you. And Alex has just asked a question about the application form. Is it an online application form, or is it uploading a CV? I'm kind of expecting that it's the NHS form, is that right?
It is the NHS form, yeah. So it's quite a hefty form, as are most NHS forms, but yeah, you'd apply directly to the NHS.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, I think that I've asked you most of the questions that have been asked, but Debs or any of the other advisors, is there anything I've missed?
Oh.
Hi, Kathy. I'm just trying to keep up. I think you've done a sterling job there of managing all the questions. I'm just double checking now to see, and I've just put a message on to see if there's anything else that's come in.
I know one of the questions, Shelley, was if you were on LinkedIn, if people have further questions. If people do have further questions, how would you, because I know you said that you're getting a bit bombarded with questions, so how would you like to deal with them?
I think probably the best thing to do is either to come directly to us as part of the team. So we've got in fact, I'll put it into the email address, into the chat. There's an EMHP@EdgeHill inbox.
Oh, wonderful.
And we try and tackle your queries that way. I'm just typing it in now. So it's emhp@edgehill.ac.uk. So you could email there directly. I mean, I don't mind trying to answer a few questions on LinkedIn. My only worry would be you might get lost in the system, and I wouldn't want that to happen. So you're more than welcome to I am on LinkedIn, absolutely. Probably some terrible photo, but it's there. But yeah, you're welcome to also email the emhp@edgehill.ac.uk inbox, and we can try and help, I think, in a more contained way, because I don't want you to get lost in my inbox on LinkedIn.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, this is an interesting one. Nick's just asked if you can clarify, when you say a pass at GCSE maths, does that mean C or above?
So I say a pass because my understanding of a pass is that you can get careers. You might want to, Kathy, you might want to correct me here, but I think it's an E or above.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be a C or above. A lot of courses will say GCSE grade A to C. I think you were saying that it doesn't have to be a C as long as they've got a pass of some sort. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's brilliant.
Or equivalency. Will you accept equivalencies for that as well? If sometimes people have done, alternatives to GCSE, or they've sat equivalency tests.
Absolutely, yeah, we do take equivalency as well. That's absolutely fine. And we also have, we're mindful that if you're making an application, you could be doing your maths now. You can write in, obviously, your kind of predicted grades. If you didn't get that, we would ask you to still get that before you can qualify. But yeah, equivalency is absolutely fine.
Brilliant, thanks, Shelley.
Great, thank you. I can see that Amy's just asked, if you're successful and managed to secure a trainee job within the NHS, how soon afterwards would you begin your training at university?
Yeah, question. Yeah, it is quite fast, the turnaround. So it's not so fast that people who are giving notice don't have time. I would say that. So we have had some trainees who've had to give a good period of notice, and that's been fine. It's usually once you're recruited, you've got to go through NHS employment checks before we can offer you a place on the course. That tends to be you'd go through the employment checks, which gives you time to think about your notice as well. So it's not been a problem for anyone that I've been aware of.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So other ones keep coming on. I think
they're still coming. Shelley, I was just going to ask, a couple of people have asked if they could have the whole recording, whereas some people I think are asking for the slides. Kathy, I don't know what's best to advise on that one, please.
I think you were going to make your slides available to us, weren't you, Shelley?
Yeah, I'll email those to you immediately, and then you've both got them. And I'm happy for you to distribute them as you wish, because there's nothing on there that wouldn't be shared from our website.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
So probably what we often do is send out the slides at the end of a session, and then if anyone wants the recording, they can ask us for that as well. And Shelley, would you be happy for us to put a link to the recording on our website?
Yeah, that's fine. I won't listen to it back because of my accent, but yeah, that's fine.
I understand.
I'm the same. I think we've covered everything. I think we've got lots of thank yous coming in now, because it has been a really great session. Thank you.
Yeah, it really has, Shelley. It's answered so many questions.
I've learned a lot about it myself as well. As you say, it's an emerging role, isn't it? Can I just ask Shelley, and sorry, you might have covered this because I was sort of part answering questions, part trying to take notes. But you know, the role of the learning mentor. I mean, I noticed particularly with my children at school that the learning mentor was trying to kind of cover this role a little bit, and I'm assuming now that this role, as you say, is emerging. That is technically, is it going to kind of replace that learning mentor remit? Because that role's been around for quite a while now, hasn't it?
It has. I would replace that. No, I think the plan is that this is an additional role, and the intention would be that the EMHP would work with the learning mentor. So the learning mentor would still be that person who potentially identifies those children at need, and they would then, whereas it's been an assumed kind of extra role really for learning mentor to support mental health, which isn't really what they're there for necessarily. They would be to refer to an EMHP, which I think again it's a nice thing that is the whole school approach of trying to expand on just what was teachers and teaching assistants and learning mentors, all teachers, trying really hard to manage what is a growing mental health crisis.
That makes sense. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Have we, oh gosh, 30 more chat messages. Are they all thank yous, Kathy?
They're all thank yous. I haven't seen any more coming in. But actually, there were loads of questions. I think, you know, people have been really interested, Shelley, and so it's been really useful talk. Thank you.
No problem at all. My emails have been really slow to open, but I will send you these slides through, Kathy, as soon as it gets opened.
Yeah, okay, that's wonderful. Thank you.
That's brilliant. I'll stop recording now as well, shall I? And then
yeah,
must remember to do that.